Welcome to the Taken Hour, a quiet corner of the night made just for you. Before we drift away, gently tap subscribe so this calm place is always within reach. Now let your body soften into the bed, shoulders melting, jaw unclenching, breath becoming slow and warm. Tonight, we follow a student who woke in a hospital and whispered that he had lived on a ship of soft light for almost a year. There is no rush to understand him. The story will unfold like a slow tide, carrying you further from the noise of the day. For now, simply listen, breathe, and allow sleep to come whenever it wishes. The room around the student is dim, wrapped in the gentle hush of evening machines. Curtains hang like quiet waves, barely moving in a draft that smells faintly of antiseptic and rain. He notices the weight of the sheets, the cool press of fabric against his arms, the soft rhythm of monitors beside him. For a long moment, he simply breathes, surprised by how solid everything feels. 11 months, the nurse had said, kindly, as if talking about the weather. 11 months gone. He blinks, and behind his eyelids he still sees a glow, tender and pale, waiting where memory and dream overlap. He does not remember falling asleep at all. One moment there had been exams, crowded buses, the weight of a backpack, and ordinary worries. Then a feeling like sinking into warm water, but upright, fully awake, as if the world itself had exhaled and taken him with it. In that in-between space, gravity loosened its grip, and the sound of traffic faded into a low humming chord. He remembers thinking that the darkness around him felt kind, not empty. Somewhere ahead, something glowed like folded moonlight, and the air smelled faintly of rain on metal and distant ocean. In the hospital, voices pass by his door like slow-moving clouds, never quite touching him. Their words blend together into a calm background murmur, while his attention drifts inward. The soft light, he remembers, is not harsh or blinding. It feels more like being held. When he focuses, the memory sharpens, a wide chamber that is not exactly a room, its edges melting into shadow, its center wrapped in luminous haze. There is no fear in that memory, only a quiet curiosity, like walking into a library after closing time. Whatever waited there seemed patient, as if it had all the years in the world. He tries to explain it to the doctor, who stands at his bedside with kind eyes, and a clipboard. Not a dream, he repeats softly, searching for the right words. He tells them about working, about being given tasks on a ship that did not feel like metal, but like living light, shaped into halls and passages. Every corridor glowed with a dim serenity, and when he placed his hand on the walls, they warmed under his touch. Time there felt slow and deep, like the bottom of a lake. He is sure of the days, the routines, the rhythm of an entire year unfolding in silence. At first, he had floated in a cocoon of brightness, suspended without weight or sound. Then a gentle pulse moved through the light, like a heartbeat carried by water, and shapes began to form. Arches grew around him, curved and graceful, not built but grown from the glow itself. The floor settled under his feet, firm yet springy, as if the ship were breathing beneath him. Soft patterns shimmered across the surfaces, shifting like slow clouds, never repeating exactly. He remembers standing there, listening to the faint hum beneath everything, and realizing he was not alone, even if he saw no one. The presence came first, as a feeling, a subtle warmth in his chest that did not belong to his own body. It was like being noticed by a calm ocean, something vast yet utterly gentle. Thoughts brushed against his awareness without words, like fingertips sliding over the surface of still water. You are safe, the feeling seemed to convey, not as a sentence, but as a deep, steady certainty. His breathing slowed, synchronized with the soft humming that filled the chamber. Each inhale brushed against invisible attention. Each exhale answered by a faintly brighter glow in the walls around him. On the second remembered morning aboard the ship, there was the illusion of dawn. The light in his chamber grew warmer, shifting from silver to a tender gold, as if some unseen horizon were brightening. Though there was no window, he could sense distance in the brightness, like sunlight traveling across a quiet sea to reach him. A place to stand appeared, a smooth platform rising under his feet, and the air carried a faint scent like warm stone after rain. The sensation of the presence curled around him again, patient and unhurried, inviting him to explore at his own pace. They gave him tasks, though no one ever handed him anything. Instead, the ship itself seemed to offer gentle suggestions. A panel would glow slightly brighter, or a pattern would ripple along a corridor, leading him to a new space. There he might find rows of floating shapes, like translucent stones suspended in the air, waiting for his touch. When he placed his hands near them, they responded with soft tonal notes, arranging themselves into harmonious patterns. He never felt forced, only guided, as if the ship was teaching him a language made of light and sound and slow, calming motion. Back in the hospital, the ceiling feels low compared to the endless curve of the ship. He follows the quiet paths of memory to keep from feeling trapped. When the fluorescent lights seem too sharp, he closes his eyes and replaces them with the ship's gentle luminescence. He tells the nurse about the floating stones and the singing patterns, and she smiles, calling it a beautiful dream. He does not argue. Her kindness is real, even if her belief is not. Still, when she leaves, he touches the cool rail of the bed and almost expects it to warm and hum beneath his fingers. On the ship, there was a place he thinks of as the garden, though it was nothing like the parks he knew. No soil, no leaves, no sky. Instead, there were softly drifting clusters of light, each one shaped like a seed halfway between star and lantern. They floated at different heights, swaying as though to an invisible breeze. When he approached, they brightened, revealing faint inner structures like delicate crystal. He learned to guide them with his hands, arranging them into slow spirals that turned around him. The presence watched quietly, sending a feeling of approval that felt like a warm blanket. Days on the ship did not have clocks. Yet, he sensed a rhythm. Periods of activity flowed into periods of rest, marked only by changes in color and tone. When it was time to sleep, the light dimmed to a deep blue, scattered with tiny points like distant stars, and the floor softened under him. Lying there, he felt the slow pulse of the vessel moving somewhere far between worlds. The presence quieted but never vanished, like a companion sitting at the edge of his awareness, humming a lullaby without sound. He slept deeper than he ever had on Earth, wrapped in the ship's gentle breathing. He wonders, in the hospital, whether his body had been here all along, breathing shallowly while his mind walked in starlit corridors. The thought does not frighten him. Instead, it leaves a strange calm. As doctors adjust papers and ask structured questions, he listens for even the faintest echo of that inner hum. It is different now, quieter, as if heard through walls and weather, but he is certain it is there. When he concentrates, the edges of the room soften just a little, and he imagines the ship passing far overhead, still traveling, still patient, still aware of him. One of his earliest tasks was to trace pathways of light along a vast, curved surface. The wall rose above him like a gentle wave, its surface smooth and faintly reflective. Tiny points of brightness appeared, scattered in no pattern he could recognize. When he reached toward them, slim lines of light connected under his fingertips, forming slowly shifting constellations. Each connection created a soft tone that vibrated through his hands and chest. He sensed that he was helping the ship think, organizing something immense and subtle, like tidying a sky full of half-remembered stars. Sometimes, the presence would grow more focused, like a spotlight of attention resting gently on his thoughts. It never pushed, never demanded answers. Instead, it offered impressions, drifting worlds, quiet moons, oceans hidden under ice, all felt as if remembered from someone else's long journey. He understood that the ship, or whatever guided it, had crossed distances beyond numbers. In its company, his own life felt both small and carefully held, like a single candle carried through a boundless cathedral. The sense of scale was enormous, yet there was no loneliness in it, only a vast, patient companionship. In the hospital evenings, the student watches twilight stretch across the small window, fading from blue to purple. Outside, city lights flicker on like pale imitations of the ship's inner glow. He lets the contrast soothe him rather than sadden him. Here there are footsteps, carts, quiet conversations in the hallway. There had been endless corridors and stars. Both worlds, he realizes, carry their own kinds of light and sound. He closes his eyes and breathes in time with the traffic far below, pretending it is the steady heartbeat of the vessel that once cradled him between unknown stars. On the ship, there was no sharp boundary between learning and resting. When he grew tired, the tasks themselves seemed to soften. Pathways dimmed, tones slowed, and the floor under him subtly reshaped into a cushion. Sometimes he would wake from a nap already standing, as if the vessel had gently lifted him into readiness. He never stumbled. Gravity always met his feet kindly. The presence seemed especially tender then, wrapping him in reassurance that felt like warm hands resting lightly on his shoulders. He began to trust it the way a child trusts a steady tide. He remembers one long passage, filled with strands of shimmering mist. They hung from the ceiling to the floor, swaying slowly, though no wind touched them. When he walked through, the mist parted around him with a faint tingle, leaving tiny sparks that faded on his skin. Each step forward brought a different soft scent: cooled metal, distant rain, something like crushed petals, all delicate and fleeting. The presence felt close there, as if watching his reactions with quiet interest. He understood, without words, that the ship was showing him fragments of worlds it had known. Back in the hospital, his family visits, their faces bright with relief and confusion. They bring flowers that smell strongly of earth and sunlight, and the scent startles him after so long with the ship's cooler fragrances. As they talk, their voices overlap, questions spilling out, explanations offered, laughter breaking through tears. He listens with a strange double awareness, feeling both close and distant, as if standing on two floors at once. Beneath the conversation, he can almost hear the steady hum of the vessel, like a memory of background music that never fully leaves the room. As the months unfolded on the ship, he began to sense patterns in the tasks. What at first seemed random became a quiet curriculum. One day, he was guiding luminous seeds into spirals. Another, he was tracing constellations across curved walls. Later, he was simply sitting still while waves of tone washed through him. Each activity left him a little more attuned, a little more able to hear fine differences in light and sound. He realized he was being taught to listen, not with his ears, but with his whole body, as if he were slowly becoming another instrument aboard the vessel. Sleep on the ship had its own special place, a hollow shaped like a half-open shell. When he curled inside, the inner surface glowed faintly, matching the rhythm of his breathing. Every slow inhale drew in a cascade of tiny lights. Every exhale let them drift back into the walls. It felt as though the vessel were studying his dreams and smoothing away their sharp edges, leaving only gentle, floating images. Nights there were not escapes from the day, but extensions of the same calm curiosity, a softer layer of the same long conversation between him and the unseen presence. In the hospital, dreams feel thinner, easily torn by the beep of a monitor or the shift of footsteps in the hall. Yet, now and then, just as he drifts off, he feels the old shell cradle return. He imagines the bed beneath him reshaping, the walls breathing softly in time with his chest. For a few heartbeats, he is certain that if he opened his eyes, he would see the familiar glow and the slow spin of luminous seeds. But when he does look, there is only the quiet room, the faint light from the corridor, and the steady comfort of being back on Earth. One calm segment of his time aboard the ship was devoted to simply staring outward. A circular opening appeared in the wall, not exactly a window, more like a shallow bowl of darkness that showed a depth beyond itself. Within it, stars drifted slowly, their light softened as if seen through water. Sometimes streaks of brightness passed by, silent and graceful, leaving shimmering trails that took long moments to fade. He stood there often, hands resting on the warm rim, feeling the vessel's motion as a barely noticeable lean. The presence shared the view with him, offering quiet awe without commentary. The more time he spent with that view, the less he worried about where exactly he was. Distances lost their usual meaning. Instead of thinking in kilometers or years, he began to feel journeys as changes in tone and color. A faint shift from blue to violet meant a region with heavier silence, while a move toward green felt like passing by unseen fields. He realized the ship navigated not only through space, but through textures of quiet. Each destination was a different flavor of stillness, and he was being allowed to taste them in the safest way possible. In the hospital, time returns to the rigid shape of clocks and schedules. Nurses measure his pulse, adjust drips, note numbers on screens. Yet within him, another kind of measurement persists. When he focuses, he can sense subtle changes in the feel of silence around him, as if the ship has taught him to read the room differently. A bus passing outside adds a low, rolling warmth. A sudden laugh in the hallway brings a bright spark. He begins to realize that everyday life has its own constellations, its own gentle currents waiting to be noticed. There was a moment on the ship when he first understood that the presence itself might be many voices braided together. During one task, he stood in a wide chamber while waves of tone rolled through from all directions. Each wave carried a slightly different feeling, like distinct personalities humming in harmony. Some were playful, shimmering quicker. Others moved slowly, deep and reassuring. Together, they formed a single vast awareness, but he could feel the individual threads. It comforted him to think of the ship not as a single mind, but as a patient community watching over his small, bright life. On quiet days in the hospital, he closes his eyes and imagines those braided voices humming softly just beyond hearing. He lets the imagined tones blend with the distant sounds of elevators and closing doors. The result is a private symphony, slow and low, that makes the ceiling feel higher and the walls less final. He does not know if the presence can still sense him across whatever distance lies between. Yet each time he breathes deeply and relaxes his hands, there is a familiar warmth in his chest, as if some part of that community still holds a gentle watch. On the vessel, he eventually became comfortable enough to ask questions without words. He would focus on an image, like a particular star or the shape of a seed light, and hold it gently in his mind. The presence would respond with a change in the room, a shift in color, a new tone, a slight alteration to gravity. From these responses, he pieced together meanings, like learning to understand a friend's expressions. Over time, he realized that the ship never answered with strict facts. Instead, it answered with perspectives, showing how things felt, how they related, and how small disruptions could be healed. When the doctors ask about his missing months, he thinks of those perspective-based answers. They want dates, locations, diagnoses, and he understands why. Their work lives in precise labels. He does his best to tell them about the light, the tasks, the feeling of being taught, but the words fall short. Still, he notices that some of them listen with more than professional curiosity. One doctor pauses, pen hovering, as if trying to imagine a ship that heals with sound and color. In those moments, he feels the same quiet flicker of connection he once felt with the braided presence. There was a particular light pattern aboard the ship that always signaled deep rest ahead. It began as a soft ring of pale brightness at the edges of his vision, slowly closing inward until the center of the room dimmed. The walls cooled to a gentle gray, and thin streams of silver drifted downward like slow rain. When he reached out, the strands dissolved against his skin with a tiny sparkle, leaving behind a feeling of release. Each time this happened, the presence quieted to a background murmur, giving him space to simply be, unobserved and entirely safe. He sometimes wishes the hospital had such clear rituals for rest. Instead, night arrives by degrees. Lights dimmed, curtains drawn, shoes squeaking less often in the hall. He creates his own pattern, closing his eyes and imagining that silver rain drifting through the room. Each exhale he takes is another strand dissolving against his skin, carrying away worry and leftover questions. As his breathing slows, the beeps and distant voices blend into a single soft hum. In that hum, for a few moments before sleep, he can almost believe the ship has gently folded its attention around the building. One long day on the ship, he was guided to a narrow passage that felt older than the others. The walls there held fine lines like age rings in a tree, each one faintly glowing. As he walked, the presence dimmed, giving him a sense of solitude. He realized he was walking through the vessel's memory, each ring marking a journey completed, a star passed, a world briefly touched. When he placed his palm against a section of wall, a single image bloomed in his mind. A quiet ocean under 3 moons, its surface calm as glass. After that walk, he began to think of the ship not just as a traveler, but as an archivist of stillness. Every place it had passed collected in its structure as quiet impressions rather than detailed records. It did not store names or numbers. It stored moods, the way a room feels after laughter, or a forest feels at dawn. Being allowed to trace those memories felt intimate, like reading someone's diary made of weather and light. He understood then why his own inner calm had grown stronger. He had been learning from a being that carried centuries of peaceful moments. Back on Earth, he starts to notice the way the hospital holds its own archive of moods. A chair remembers the weight of tired visitors. A window ledge carries the feel of afternoon sun and quiet conversation. Even the hallway corner near the vending machines holds a subtle echo of late-night laughter. As he pays attention, ordinary spaces begin to feel less empty. The skills learned aboard the ship, the ability to sense texture in silence, Now turn this building into a softer, more livable place. The world is still the same, but his way of listening has changed. On the vessel, there came a point when he realized that he was no longer simply a visitor. The tasks flowed more smoothly, his hesitations fewer, his questions more nuanced. The presence responded with a quiet pride that warmed the back of his throat and the palms of his hands. He sensed that the ship considered him part of its crew, even if his role was small. Instead of feeling overwhelmed, he felt a deep ease, like finally finding a seat that fits just right. For the first time in his life, both gravity and purpose seemed to support him perfectly. When he shares this sense of belonging with the hospital therapist, she listens with a gentle tilt of her head. They talk about feeling out of place before his disappearance, about restless nights and constant, quiet worry. Together, they explore the idea that the ship, real or imagined, offered him a model of safety he had never known. She does not insist on choosing between dream and reality. Instead, she asks how he might build that same feeling here. Her questions feel very much like the presence's responses, not demands for facts, but invitations to reshape his world gently from the inside, toward what he thinks of as the final month on the ship. The tasks grew quieter. There were fewer corridors to walk, fewer panels to touch. Instead, he spent long stretches in a central chamber where the light pooled like slow-moving water. He would sit cross-legged on a warm platform, while tiny luminous shapes drifted around him, gathering in patterns that echoed his breathing. The presence felt more diffuse there, spread out and relaxed. It was as if both he and the vessel were preparing for something, not with urgency, but with the careful calm of folding a cherished blanket. In that chamber, he sensed for the first time that the connection might change. There was no fear, only a soft awareness that every tide eventually turns. The presence began to send him more images of Earth, a cracked sidewalk in afternoon light, the smell of coffee, the echo of distant music through thin walls. These memories were as carefully held as the visions of alien oceans and silent moons. He understood that to the ship, his homeworld was just another quiet place worth remembering. The realization comforted him. Nothing, it seemed, was being abandoned, only gently rearranged. In the hospital, The student notices how often those familiar Earth images appear in his mind now. The way a spoon rings against a cup, the pattern of raindrops on the window, the weight of a blanket across his legs. Each small thing feels newly detailed, as if someone has adjusted the focus on his senses. He suspects that the ship, in its own way, trained him to appreciate these simple textures. Life before had been crowded with abstractions and deadlines. Now, every sensory detail seems like a small, steady anchor he can hold on to, especially at night. There was a final corridor on the ship that he walked only once. It sloped upward with almost no light. The floor warm, but firmer than usual. As he moved, the presence drew closer, wrapping his thoughts in a feeling that was neither goodbye nor welcome, but something in between. At the end of the corridor, he found not a door, but a soft, luminous fog that seemed to breathe in time with him. Standing at its edge, he felt the full weight of both worlds pressing gently against his skin, like two waves meeting and holding each other. In that fog, there were no images, only sensations. The cool slickness of hospital sheets, the distant rush of city traffic, the hum of the ship's heart, the quiet of exam rooms past midnight. Everything layered together, not in confusion, but in harmony. He felt the presence touch the very center of his awareness, not pulling, not pushing, simply holding still. In that stillness, he realized he did not have to choose which world was more real. Both had shaped him, and both could continue to do so. The fog brightened, and something inside him answered with a gentle, unafraid sigh. The next memory is of waking in the hospital bed to the steady beep of monitors and the soft murmur of voices. His body felt heavier, as though gravity had decided to hold him more firmly. Yet there was no sense of falling, only of gently settling back into a familiar shape. Someone squeezed his hand, and warmth spread up his arm like slowly rising light. When he opened his eyes, faces came into focus, lined with hope and weariness. The ship's inner glow had faded, but he could still feel a faint echo of its reassurance resting quietly behind his ribs. As days pass, he begins to walk the hospital corridors with cautious steps. The floor is solid, cool beneath thin socks. The air carrying familiar smells of disinfectant and coffee. He pays attention to the way light pools differently at each doorway, how shadows soften near windows. These small details feel like gentle exercises, practicing the same attentive presence he once used aboard the ship. Sometimes, when a trolley rolls by and its wheels echo down the hall, he imagines it as a tiny version of the vessel, moving on its own quiet errands through the building. At night, when the hospital grows very still, he sits by the window and watches distant lights blink on and off. Airplanes trace slow arcs across the sky, their tiny beacons flickering. He imagines the ship somewhere above or beyond, not lost, just continuing its patient journeys. Perhaps, he thinks, it passes near Earth more often than anyone guesses, simply listening to the soft noise of cities and seas. The notion soothes him. It means that even if he never sets foot in its glowing chambers again, the vessel and its braided presence are never entirely out of reach. He starts keeping a quiet notebook in which he writes not explanations, but impressions. Instead of asking whether the ship was real, he describes how it felt to walk through strands of mist, how the tones hummed against his bones, how the garden's seed lights responded to his touch. On other pages, he records the sensation of cool tiles under his feet, the hush before dawn in the ward, the way warm tea smells in the early morning. Lined up side by side, the two kinds of entries seem less like separate worlds and more like variations of the same gentle melody. Over time, the doctors grow more comfortable leaving gaps in their understanding. The missing 11 months remain unexplained in the charts, represented only by brief technical phrases. Yet, when they visit him, their questions become softer, less about filling in a timeline and more about how he feels now. He appreciates this shift. It mirrors the ship's own way of interacting, focusing on the present moment rather than fixing every unknown. In those conversations, the hospital room feels a little more spacious, as though the walls have stepped back to make room for whatever the future might quietly hold. He notices that when he tells his story, the part that feels most important is not the distance traveled, but the gentleness of the encounter. There were no commands, no tests of bravery, no dramatic revelations. Instead, there was a patient, luminous attention, teaching him to listen more carefully to himself and the spaces around him. That same lesson now continues in subtle ways. The pauses before he speaks, the way he takes an extra breath before responding, the simple act of noticing when his shoulders relax. The ship taught these habits once. Now he carries them forward on his own. Occasionally, late at night, he imagines what it would be like if the presence checked in on him. Not dramatically, but with the same subtlety it always used. Perhaps the light in the hallway would briefly feel warmer, or the hum of the air system would drop into a familiar low tone. He would not need proof or a clear message, just the smallest hint that somewhere beyond his ceiling, a vast braided awareness was aware of his breathing and pleased that he was still learning to rest. The thought settles over him like an extra blanket, soothing and weightless. As discharge approaches, he walks the hospital grounds, noticing how the night air feels against his skin. The sky above is wide, but not empty, sprinkled with stars that look softer now that he has seen them through other eyes. Trees sway in a mild wind, their leaves making a quiet rushing sound that reminds him of the ship's distant tones. He realizes that the calm he found in that luminous vessel does not have to fade when he leaves this place. It can travel with him, tucked somewhere between his heartbeat and his breath, a private, steady constellation. On his final night in the ward, he lies awake a little longer, not from anxiety, but from a desire to say a quiet farewell. Not to the hospital exactly, and not strictly to the ship either, but to this particular chapter that held them both. He thanks, in his own thoughts, every unseen kindness that has followed him. The nurse who adjusted his pillow without comment, the silent corridors that let him practice listening, the vast presence that first found him in soft light. As he does, a familiar warmth gathers in his chest, gentle and unhurried. When sleep finally comes that night, it arrives like the ship's silver rain, slow and tender. He feels himself drifting not up or down, but sideways, into a space where labels do not matter. For a brief, luminous moment, he senses the garden's floating seeds, the memory corridor's glowing rings, the soft shell-shaped bed. At the same time, he feels the weight of his real blanket, the firmness of the hospital mattress, the faint buzz of the building's systems. All of it overlaps without conflict, like harmonies layering over a single steady note. In that layered space, he realizes there is no strict border between dreaming of safety and actually feeling safe. The body responds to both in similar ways. Muscles release, breathing slows, thoughts soften at the edges. The ship's lessons and the hospital's routines cooperate rather than compete. Together, they show him that he can create pockets of quiet even amidst uncertainty. As this understanding settles in, the images around him blur into a comfortable haze. He no longer needs to watch them carefully. It is enough to know that gentleness, wherever it comes from, is a place he can return to. Morning comes eventually. But he does not experience it as a sharp break. Rather, it feels like a slow brightening of the same calm space he fell asleep in. Sunlight slips between curtains, laying quiet patterns across the sheets. There is paperwork ahead, conversations, the practical steps of leaving. Yet beneath them runs a steady undercurrent of ease, as if the ship's hum has been translated into the soft noises of everyday life. He moves through the motions gently, responding when needed, resting when possible, carrying the sense that he is still in careful orbit around something kind. After discharge, his room at home feels both smaller and more intimate than the ship's vast chambers. The walls are familiar, decorated with old posters and shelves of books. In the quiet of evening, he lies on his bed and lets his eyes trace the shapes he once ignored. The curve of a lamp, the texture of the ceiling, the shadows gathered under furniture. Everything seems to glow faintly with its own kind of history. He realizes he can treat this room as another gentle vessel, one that has carried him through earlier chapters and is ready to carry him through new, slower nights. He does not try to recreate the ship exactly. Instead, he borrows pieces of its atmosphere. Soft, warm light instead of harsh brightness. Gentle sounds in the background, like distant rain or low music, to mimic the hum of the engines. A tidy space around where he sleeps, free of clutter, so that rest feels more like floating. Little by little, he shapes his room into a place that invites his body to relax before his mind has time to worry. Each adjustment is a small conversation with the memory of that luminous vessel, turning recollection into daily comfort. When friends ask about what happened during those missing months, he chooses his words carefully. Some days he speaks of a long, strange dream about working on a ship that felt alive. Other days he describes it more simply as a time his mind went somewhere safe while his body healed. He notices that the details matter less than the feeling he remembers. Whether they believe him fully, partially, or not at all, does not disturb his calm. The experience has already done its work, teaching him how to find stillness even when questions remain unanswered. On particularly restless evenings, when old worries try to tighten around his chest, he returns to a simple practice from the ship. He imagines tracing constellations on the walls, connecting tiny points of light only he can see. With each imagined line, he pairs a slow breath. Inhale, connect one point. Exhale, draw the next. Soon, the room feels subtly altered, filled with quiet patterns that only appear when he relaxes. The exercise does not erase his concerns, but it stretches space around them, making room for sleep to slip in gently around the edges. He comes to understand that the dream, or encounter, or whatever it was, may have lasted a year in more ways than one. Not just in the months marked by hospital charts, but in the way its influence continues to unfold. Each night, he chooses gentler light. Each pause before he answers a question. Each moment, he notices a small, comforting detail, extends that experience forward. The ship's patient guidance did not end when he opened his eyes in the ward. It simply changed form, turning into habits, into perspective, into a quieter relationship with his own thoughts. Some nights, as he lies listening to the distant sounds of the city, he wonders if someone else, somewhere, is waking up with a similar story. Perhaps another bed in another building holds a person who remembers corridors of light and a presence that hummed with quiet care. If so, he hopes they too are learning to bring that calm back into their waking life. The thought makes the world feel slightly smaller and kinder, as if unseen threads of luminous experience weave through many lives, connecting them in soft, invisible currents. Eventually, he stops trying to decide whether the ship belonged more to dreams or to reality. The question loses its urgency, fading into the background like an unanswered riddle he no longer needs to solve. What remains is the memory of being treated with unwavering gentleness by something vast and strange. That memory shapes how he treats himself and others, with more patience, more softness, more willingness to let questions remain open. In this way, the journey continues, not in distance traveled, but in the way each quiet decision expands the space around his life. As your own eyes grow heavier now, you can borrow his story, as if it were your own soft vessel. Imagine a ship made of patient light, somewhere just beyond your ceiling, listening without judgment to the rhythm of your breathing. Picture its chambers gently reshaping to fit whatever rest you need, its braided presence humming in distant, soothing tones. Whether it visited you or not does not matter. What matters is that the idea of such kindness can wrap itself around your thoughts, loosening them, making space for sleep to drift in like slow silver rain. If you wish, you can let each breath tonight trace a small constellation on the inside of your mind. Inhale, a point of light. Exhale, a line connecting it to the next. Soon, you may sense the outline of your own quiet vessel, built from memories, hopes, and moments of unexpected tenderness. It does not need engines or destinations, only your permission to float gently in the dark. Around it, the vastness of the night ceases to be empty and becomes simply spacious, giving all your thoughts room to settle softly to the bottom. If the story of the student returns to you later, during some busy day, you can let it be a reminder rather than a puzzle. A reminder that even in missing time and unanswered questions, there can be warmth and guidance. That somewhere beyond the visible world, possibilities exist, where you are met not with tests, but with patient curiosity. You do not have to know whether such a ship waits specifically for you. It is enough to know that your mind can imagine it, and in doing so, offer your body a reason to soften, even for just a moment. And if, on some future night, you find yourself between waking and sleep, you might notice a sensation like stepping sideways into a deeper quiet. Perhaps you will feel the air thicken slightly, as though filled with distant, unseen stars. Perhaps you will sense a presence that does nothing but observe your breathing with quiet approval. If that happens, you can think of the ship again, of its soft light and year-long patience, and allow yourself to drift. Even if it is only memory pretending to be reality, the comfort it offers can still be real to your resting body. For now, though, there is nothing more you need to do. The story has carried you as far as this moment, like a quiet vessel crossing from one side of the night to the other. You can let its details blur as your own dreams start to form, trusting that whatever was gentle in it will remain. The student, the ship, the hospital, and your own bed all drift together in a soft, shared darkness. If your thoughts circle back, they can land again on this same calm feeling, looping gently, until at last you slip fully into sleep.